The time has come. So hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Angelina Lippert, and I'm the Chief Curator of Poster House. Established in 2019 and located in the Manhattan neighborhood of Chelsea, Poster House is the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of the poster. Now today I'm joined by Stephen Coles, Associate Curator and Editorial Director of Letterform Archive, a San Francisco-based nonprofit center for inspiration, education, publishing, and community in graphic design. Today's program is a Salon on Letterforms of the Vienna Secession, as I hope you all know. So this program is presented in conjunction with Poster House's current exhibition, Julius Klinger, Posters for a Modern Age, on loan to us from the Wolfsonian in Miami Beach, Florida. It examines the innovative style of one of the leading graphic artists associated with Jugendstil and the secessionist movements, and is on view through August 15th. Now, if you have any questions for Stephen during the program, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A box, and I will vocalize them for you. He apparently loves being interrupted. Now, just make sure to set your chat, as I mentioned earlier, to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your insightful comments. Closed captioning is available for those who need it, and you can turn it on or off by clicking the little CC button at the bottom of your screen. And this program will be recorded and made available to all registered attendees after the event. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen.
Thanks so much, Angelina. It was a great opportunity to do this in conjunction with the show, because we've been spending some time with this part of our collection a lot recently, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a bit. And we'll also talk a little bit about the Letterforms of Klinger. So there's a lot of synchronicity going on there. You're going to see my desktop really briefly while I start the slides. So just a little background on the secession, and we'll get into some more history in a bit. But wanted to give you an idea of where this whole movement comes from. And it really is a movement, not a style, and that, you know, you'll see why that's different from other movements that we often, you know, give the same kind of chapters in books. Because it really is about a group of artists making a conscious decision to make change within their field. But I also want to mention that most of what we're going to talk about today is just really zoomed in on the letterforms. So that's what we love at the archive, and it's something that I haven't had an opportunity to really get into until preparing for this talk. So you're going to see a lot of, we'll start out with lots of black and white, because we're just going to be looking at letters, and then we'll bring in the color. But I assume you'll all be down for that because you're all letter fans as well. So the secession started right on a single day, April 3rd in 1897. A group of modernists who were frustrated with the kind of stuffy conservative art scene in Austria got together. They invited Gustav Klimt, who was a really respected and successful artist, of course, to lead them in this rebellion. And they were directly kind of responding to the Association of Austrian Artists, which was the group at the time that was really, you know, kind of the trade group, or the fine artist group. And Klimt did this very dramatic thing. He went and read a letter in the Künstlerhaus, declaring the formation of a new group that was called the Union of Austrian Artists. And it was signed by the 40 founding members, including many members of the Association of the Austrian Artists. And so it's almost like this, you know, posting a list of complaints to the wall. And unsurprisingly, they were asked to leave the building. And then 2 days later, they were forced to resign from the association. And so, like it or not, these designers, specifically led by Klimt, Moser, and Hoffman, were forced to really create something new, which was something that they were trying to do anyway, but it was all happened on a single day in a way. And it's important to note that this is all part of a movement. It was part of a wanting change in what was going on in art and design at the time. And it's not really a style that was kind of later on assigned to what was going on visually in culture, kind of like other styles. And we'll talk about that now. So what was going on at the time? You have the arts and crafts movement, starting in England with people like William Morris. Their ideal was to rebel against this kind of industrialization that was going on in the Western world at the time. They wanted to go back to handcrafts. They called it the purity of the handmade, and really looked back at medieval manuscripts and other art like Gothic art to rethink how books were made, how type was designed, how ornamentation was done. And you can see that in this book from Morris. Zooming in on the details, there's just a dense filling of the page with this kind of medieval ornamentation, and even the typeface, comes from the earliest Roman type, the Venetian styles from Jensen and others. So all of this is about going back to the past. And then that also was followed by people like Will Bradley in the US, really popular illustrator, printer, later type designer. He doing something very similar here with this kind of portfolio book, and just filling the page with ornamentation. In France and throughout other parts of Europe, you have Art Nouveau happening at the same time. This is all late 1800s. And, a lot of us associate Art Nouveau with people like Mucha, who were doing these incredible mix-ups, mashups between floral and botanical and organic patterns, and bringing them into their art. Art Nouveau, of course, means new art. They were trying to think about new ways of working and living, but also there's this real strong tie to natural forms. And this incredible book by Mucha that we're fortunate to have at the archive. By the way, everything that I'm showing you today is from the collection. There's a couple of kind of reference images that aren't, but most of this, as we do in our salons, is just showcasing what we have in the collection and that what you can see as well. A lot of it is in the online archive, which somebody can drop a link to in the chat. So this book here is a really dramatically new telling of the Lord's Prayer. It's full of mysticism and a return to nature, and even the letter forms themselves. These are like living things. These are, taken away from the traditions of calligraphy and book printing, and they're really drawn letters rather than written letters. And they're really these kind of organic forms that feel like they're alive. So we associate all this kind of thing with Art Nouveau. And then the German version of Art Nouveau was usually referred to as Jugendstil, and that's coming from the magazine Jugend, which means youth. And similar to Art Nouveau, it was about new ideas in art, but it's also very organic, very tied to nature. And one of many, many examples of Jugendstil, there was a lot going on in lettering and type in Jugendstil. German type foundries were very active at this time. There's industrialization, which made type easier to create at scale. And so there are all sorts of new styles towards the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. This is by the very well-known designer Peter Behrens, taking some of these ideas of Jugendstil, pairing them with his calligraphic styles. So he has a typeface there on the left, and then these ornamented initials on the right. But again, a lot of this is about filling the space with ornamentation, and that ornamentation being very drawn from nature. So how does the Vienna Secession differ from this? I think this is such a great quote from the Inland Printer, which is a periodical that covered design and printing and a lot of typography and lettering in the US and abroad. And there's a lot of good criticism in the Inland Printer. One of the things we always say at the archive is if you want to understand an era well, the periodicals from that period are some of the best places to look. They're some of our favorite research sources. So the Inland Printer in 1907, this is, from an American point of view, what they're seeing as secession, but he's describing it as this departure from the kind of eel-like forms, what he says, the modern squirm of Nouveau, and talks about the geometry that the secessionists were bringing in. And just as a stark example of that, and as a contrast to what we were looking at before, here is a poster from one of the founders of the secession, Coleman Moser. And you can see differences right away with geometry, with restrained decoration, with large fields of flat open space or blocks of color. And this verticality, that was also a recurring theme. Again, I want to, remind everyone that this is not a style. It's a movement, and it's a group of people that happen to have similar ideas. But you'll see as we go through these letterforms that they vary quite a bit. But you can see some kind of trends going on here. What's different between the secessionists and the Jugendstil and Nouveau movements, and particularly in the letterforms. So a lot of geometry here, which was pretty unusual at the time. Most lettering and type was based on calligraphy in some way, or brush writing, stone carving. Here we have monolinear or letterforms with no contrast in them. You have circles, straight lines, and really inventive letter shapes where they're redrawn to fit the space, to create these kind of collecting ligatures. And this period had completely new ideas in what the Latin alphabet can look like. And that's one of the most exciting things about it in terms of those of us who love looking at letters. There's so much invention going on in this period. I can't continue though without also talking about the key reference and the key inspiration for almost all of these movements, and that is the Japanese woodblock prints, which were just making an appearance in Europe in the 1870s. They had been doing this for over 100 years, this woodblock printing where you have this real attention paid to negative space, not filling the whole canvas. And you have an illustration style, which is clearly referenced by a lot of Jugendstil and secession artists. And there's a preference for natural materials as well. So that draws back to arts and crafts movement as well. And so you'll see more and more of this influence in the stuff that we look at. The first person to really mention when we're talking about type and lettering of the secession is Larisch. He was a professor at the Kunstgewerbeschule, which was the main school of applied arts in Vienna, where a lot of the secessionists were trained or were taught. And he taught lettering. And he produced a series of really informative books on this. This is a later edition of his book, which really covers a lot of what he was teaching in his classes. This one happens to be the copy owned by Father Kadich, who you may know if you're a lettering fan, stone carving fan. We are fortunate to have this copy in the archive. We also have a copy that Lars has signed, but this is a later edition, and it demonstrates, you know, some of what he was teaching in the classes. This is pretty typical of what we would think of as lettering training today. You have the various tools and the ways that you hold and manipulate those tools to create letters. So whether it's a broad nib pen, you know, a pointed pen, the way that you rotate that pen at various angles to create different letter shapes. This is, you know, a traditional way of teaching. But he had some exercises that he used which were unique to, you know, at least what was going on in lettering instruction at the time. One of them was to take a broad nib pen and hold it on a completely perpendicular, flat angle, and experiment with that and demonstrate the kinds of letters that could be made. Not really typical of the time. Usually you'd hold it at an angle. There may be some rotation or something like that to create kind of old style script calligraphy or Roman alphabet calligraphy. But here he's kind of coming up with new forms and ideas in just one of the early exercises in his classes. He also talks a lot about thinking about rhythm and about using other materials such as engraving and woodcut letters to imagine new forms. So in this one here, you can see it's really about carving out the negative shapes of the letters rather than making the letters themselves. So it's the white space that matters here. And we'll see some examples of where this returns in some of the artists of the secession. And another key thing that really is pervasive throughout the secession is this idea of the Quellstift. And this is a word that he invented as far as I'm aware. It is basically a round-tipped pen that creates no contrast at all. So it's, you know, in our modern day terminology, you'd think of it as a ballpoint pen or a round-tipped marker. And he felt like this was the easiest way to learn because you didn't have to think about contrast. You could just focus on the proportions of the letter shapes and the rhythm and spacing. But it became something that was kind of a style that was used throughout the secession. Originally, it was just a matchstick inside a pen holder. And then he advanced that to using a cork, which he would shave into a kind of a round, tapered tip that you could do very thick, heavy lines with. And he felt that was an easier way to teach. And you can see an example of that here, where you're thinking about new and interesting letter shapes and not so much about the contrast. You're thinking about how those shapes fit together. But again, it's not about the thicks and the thins of the letters. It's about the shapes themselves. And all sorts of interesting things could be done even with something as simple as this cork pen, such as this kind of uncial scripty thing, which is shown in the book as well. Lars published also a series of really interesting collections of lettering. These were kind of collective portfolios of artists who were working at the time, many of whom were part of the Vienna Secession, but some who were associated, and maybe they were part of the Art Nouveau movements or they were other parts of Europe, but who were inspired by the secession or vice versa. So you can see some familiar names here. Otto Eckmann was a very famous Jugendstil artist, did a lot of type design as well. You can see Mucha again here. And then some names that we'll look at here, which are part of the movement and which really typify some of the lettering we saw in the secession. So here's Moser, again, the founding father of the movement, using the Quellstift in just really interesting and funky ways. Very simple monoline letters. Well, they're not simple letters, but they're simply made. And they're just fitting together in an interesting way. Here's another one using that same kind of idea, but with outlined letters and a little bit more organic shapes, more associated with Art Nouveau. Some of these I'll zoom in on so you can see a little bit more details. This idea of the double or triple horizontal on some of these letters, like the E, the F, the A, some of this can be traced back to Mackintosh, who was a designer in Scotland who the secessionists were really inspired by. He was doing some of this funky stuff with the repeating horizontal strokes in his lettering and his architectural signage. In this one, you see a few different crazy things going on, and particularly I want to draw attention to the R's. By the way, this is Plečnik. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was born in Ljubljana, which is present-day Slovenia. And he was very influential in the architecture of that area. A lot of his buildings still stand. He's often compared to Gaudi in terms of his influence on new ideas in architecture there. And he has new ideas in letterforms too. So we'll zoom in here on the letters. You can see that R. This is something those of us who are following digital type design today, you can start to see references that a lot of young type designers are looking at when they're trying to invent new ways of looking at Latin alphabet. They may seem new to a lot of readers now, but they are not new if you look at some of what secessionists were doing. And you're going to see that form return again in the other stuff we look at. Alfred Roller was super important artist and teacher of the time. This is just one of a few things we'll look at from him. He was also very interested in negative space, which we'll see more of. This is the second volume. Some more names you might recognize. George Auriol, who was really influential Art Nouveau artist and designed the typeface Auriol, which you might know. And Charles René Mackintosh, who I mentioned before, from Glasgow. A couple of people from other countries, but again, we're going to look at those who were really influential in secessionist lettering. Here's Leopold Bauer with some really cool new ideas, those capital E's, the R, kind of a lot of thing to remember is a lot of these artists or designers were architects first. So they're thinking about letters in a more of an architectural way than a lot of maybe commercial artists would think of them. And so that's where a lot of this invention and crazy ideas come from. Max Klinger, who was also very influential. This is not Julius, this is a different Klinger. Again, you see the return of that R with really funky diagonal swoop. Third volume, again, some more R's you might know. Rudolf Koch is included in this one. And Peter Behrens, who we mentioned before. But Karl Otto Czeska, one of my favorite artists from the secession, very inventive with his letter forms. He went on to design many typefaces. We'll look at a few of them. And this is just a really innovative way of looking at letters. Almost everything here is on a right angle, and yet it's so full of movement and flow. It's great. And in a totally different way, and probably drawn from woodcut letters, is Karl Krennic here. where they fit together in a very interesting way, but very angular. And here in the negative form, so white on black, you can see the reference to woodcut letters even more strongly. Berthold Loeffler, we'll see a little bit more of his work later. Here, it's again using that Quellstift or Quellstift, the cork pen, with just simple monoline letters. I mean, one of the great things about just those of us who may not be lettering artists drawing inspiration from this era is, you know, with a ballpoint pen, you can you know, mimic some of these ideas and come up with your own forms. And so it kind of gives you the freedom to get experimental with lettering, even if you don't have a lot of practice with it. It may make sense to start with something that is, you know, like a speedball pen with a round tip, if you want to just get started in lettering and then move on to learning calligraphy with contrast and the broad nib. Here's some really inventive stuff. Bruno Swichter. Love this style. It's really out there, and it again demonstrates that there isn't one idea coming out of the secession. There's a lot of different invention with letterforms. As well here with Victor Shufinsky. This is just as if somebody has taken each letter and shifted it. Those of you who love the 70s and 80s typography may know the typeface shatter. Well, here's a version of shatter from 80 years earlier. Another closer look here. Again, with the cork pen, just a round-tipped writing instrument. And love the decoration and illustration here as well that matches the lettering. Now we're getting out into outer space. We tweeted these out and shared them on social media earlier. This is Adalbert Fischl, and he was an architect as well. You can see geometry, you can see even maybe kind of the layout of a building in these letter shapes. These words are kind of a mix of Latin and mythology also here. And at first, it's hard to even tell maybe that there are letters here, but there is an alphabet, and I have to thank Elise Carlton for spending the time to go through the entire alphabet, including the diacritics, to figure out the kind of solution behind this cryptology. And it just demonstrates that there's so much flexibility in the Latin alphabet. You know, legibility, of course, is a factor, but if you want to try something new, there are a lot of different places to go. And it's kind of amazing to imagine that this was done, in early 1900s, probably around 1900, 1905. And it looks so of a different time and really a different planet. So another important series of publications from the secession is the official magazine, Ver Sacrum, which means sacred spring in Latin. So many of these words from these movements are about new ideas, fresh approaches to working and living, and so that's where this name comes from. It ran for 5 years and had a really interesting format. It was square, which drew a lot of attention to it. I'm going to just talk through it a little bit as we look at some of the covers in this bound edition that I have. It was intended to be an answer to the popular art journals in Germany, like Jugend. We talked about Jugendstil before. They were really drawing a lot of attention, and the secessionists wanted to do something similar. And in an introductory essay in their first issue, they said that their aim is to show other countries that for the first time, Austria is an independent artistic entity. And it was meant to be a clarion call to the artistic sense of the people to inspire, promote, and spread artistic life and independence. They, especially the graphic designer Alfred Roller, who I mentioned earlier, were really seeking to integrate typography and ornament and image into a unified art form on the page. And you can see examples of this here. We're looking mostly at the covers, but within these pages, there's also poetry, painting, other kinds of illustration. They were influenced by this concept of the Gesamtkunstwerk, which just means total art, making a thing that kind of brings in all of the different elements of visual or creative making. And so they partnered with lots of people in the performing and literary arts to fill these pages and make them feel like a kind of cohesive artistic whole.
We actually have a question from Kevin in the audience. How would people
Yeah.
purchase Versacrum? Was it an easily accessible magazine, or was it very exclusive? Were they expensive?
Great question. I actually don't know the answer to that, but Chris Westcott, who's been researching a lot of this period for us at the archive, may have an answer if he's in the audience. That's a really good question. I've wondered this too. One thing I was about to talk about is the advertising. There were advertisers in the backs of each issue that were not solely for people in the arts world. So it seemed like they were trying to approach a more general audience, like Jugend and the other arts magazines were. But yeah, I'm not sure how available it was. I hope somebody in the audience can enlighten us on that. So you can see lots of the people we've talked about before contributing covers. And a lot of this is also done with woodcuts. You can see that, again, that influence of the Japanese woodblock illustrations. And then I just wanted to show a couple of images here of the ad. So you had a variety of products and services being advertised, but the members, the artists, the editors of the magazine insisted on doing the ads themselves so that they could all feel cohesive. And that's why you have these just amazingly designed pages of advertising that felt like they all came from the same person, even though they're all advertising different companies. For example, here on the left, this is just for spring water. You can't imagine a more artistic way of advertising drinking water than that. Pelican, who made ink and pens, is advertising there. And in the last year of the journal's life, they produced this gem, which we're really fortunate to have at the archive. It's something that we show quite often to visitors. It's a calendar from 1903, and it features woodcuts by different artists on the left side of each page, and then the month calendar on the right side, which is designed by Alfred Roller. You see the days of the week there, the dates, in a very new inventive way fit into this square. You see the phases of the moon, and you see a lettering style which is probably going to be familiar to those of you who follow the psychedelic era. We'll look at some posters later that were inspired by this. But here is Roller at his best, just going into negative space, taking a very geometric form, a rectangle, and then carving it up with these kind of organic forms. We looked at this also in our Salon with Poster House about breaking the Swiss grid, which I recommend going take a look at as well. And here is Wes Wilson, his Fillmore poster for Moby Grape in 1967, directly cribbing this idea from Roller, and recognizing that it was such a good way of integrating both illustration and lettering together, which is something he was all about with his posters, but it also allowed this flexibility of molding the letter shapes into the form that he wanted them to take. So it's a great example of being inspired by a previous piece of work and making it do something new. So even though it's clear that he's taking these shapes directly from Roller, he's giving them a new function and making them work in a different way. Next kind of important moment in the secession is the Wiener Werkstätte, which was founded in 1903. This was more of a production community. So whereas the secession was about, mostly about art and related fields, this was the Vienna's workshops. So it is a combination of architecture, fine art, book arts, like what was going on with the secession, but it also included crafts like metalwork and leatherwork and ceramics and furniture and other kinds of product design that were accessible to the general public. That was the idea, of course, but not necessarily attainable to the masses. But it was about making things that could be used as well as looked at. And Moser designed the logo that you see here. And you can see now that straight lines and geometry really start to become more common. He's turning a flower, taking all of that natural inspiration and just making it geometric. And he's marrying it with the monogram. And they often fit together in these kind of interesting lockups of straight lines and cubes and rectangles. Another version of the logo here in this really interesting book that we have a reprint of, which covered the first 25 years of the Werkstätte. It's a pretty cool book. It's got this really interesting layout structure with big blocks of red and negative space. There you see the logo again in three-dimensional form. Which is another advantage of working with something that's based on this geometry, is you make things in the third dimension easier. And then some of the more monograms of some of the members of the Werkstätte. One of the only women, sadly, that whose work we're gonna look at today, but this is Larsch's wife, Herta, and she did some amazing things with metal. So this is from a later book about Larisch and people that he worked with, and it shows some of the kind of thing that was being made in the Werkstätte. And you can see that it being applied to objects, to products, and to architecture. Die Fläche, this was a periodical for the Werkstätte, and it was published in 2 volumes, several issues, and it is a really great overview of what was being done in the graphic arts from the workshop. Really one of our favorite things to look at the archive, and is a great showcase of lettering, of course. Here's again the cork pen being used by Leopold Forstner. Again, the verticality that we talked about as being something that was frequently used in the movement. I also wanted to note the Nina Stossinger, my friend on Instagram, said something about the diacritics here. So if you look at the umlaut in the A, why not just fit it there where it fits rather than having to worry about it at the above the letter. We've seen this kind of thing with like the U umlauts in the second line there, where you put it at the top, but it still fits within the letter. But here's a unique way of just putting it at the bottom because that's where there was space. Some really funky stuff going on from these two artists. Again, these pages are just filled with posters, advertisements, other kinds of graphic work that was being done by the members of the workshops. Repeating geometric patterns, another motif that you see a lot of. On the left, you see kind of the flowing lines of Art Nouveau letter shapes combined with these geometric patterns, which is a really wild combo, but something you see a lot of with the Werkstätte. And that Joseph Bruckmüller on the right, one of my favorite examples of combining lettering with illustration and making them feel part of the same block of wood, which they may have been, but the same cohesive piece of art. Those letters are things, whereas most letters are meant to just be read. These are to be looked at. And then the image that we use to advertise the event. This is Roller again, and you can, well, on the right is Gustav Klimt, an early poster for the secession.
Actually, one fun fact, that
Yeah.
version of Klimt's poster, that is the uncensored version. I've never seen the censored version in real life. Usually there is a very Beardsley-esque branch kind of cutting through that man's crotch. So you don't see his genitalia. So like that's a super rare image.
Good to know. Thank you. I can always count on Angelina to know these details on the posters. That's awesome. And then, yeah, so on the left is Roller, kind of combining a lot of what we've seen, the verticality, some swooping and geometric letter forms, but then also his signature letter shapes. And then in the background, this geometric pattern that draws inspiration from nature. You know, maybe it's a flower, maybe it's a clover, but it's straight lines, it's geometry mixed with this wild flowing letter forms. Second volume here, this is Bertold Löffler, who was, I think, also the editor. And I love to think about this in comparison to Moser's original mark for the Werkstätte, where, you know, again, he's taking floral shapes, but instead of making it a diamond and a square, he's turned them into circles with straight line decoration inside. Pretty wild image. And then we see some really nice dense stuff that maybe kind of recalls some of the arts and crafts stuff we looked at earlier from Wenzel Oswald. Clearly, again, these are woodblock prints. You can see how they're cut from wood. I'm assuming. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. But there's so much more we could show from this series, from Die Fläche. It is an amazing set of posters, and we're really excited to announce that we're going to be working on a facsimile edition, you know, from our copies of the periodical. And so that's one of the things that Chris and our publishing team is working on. We're really excited to bring this out, and it'll have some additional scholarship to it that I'm really excited about as well. And I've learned a ton about this whole period just from the research Chris has been doing into that. Karl Otto Czeska, again, I mentioned him before, super important in terms of lettering and type design of the time. Also a professor at the school. This is one of my favorite little books. It's small. It's about, I think 5 by 5 inches. It's retelling a kind of mythological story. A lot of these, the content from the Secession is about, Germanic mythology or Norse mythology, and this is part of that, Die Nibelungen. And most of it is all about the illustrations, which I'll show you a couple of, even though it's not to do with letters because they're just so beautiful. But here is the wonderful opening title page spread. And then the book is printed in 3 colors, blue, black, and a gold metallic. You have to see this in person to really appreciate it, but just one of my favorite combinations of lettering, illustration, printing, storytelling. It's just a magnificent little thing. We actually had a duplicate of this that we recently sold in the auction that we had with Salon. Another thing to note about it, thanks to my wife Laura for this photo. Most of our photos are just straight overhead, but she and I were looking at it the other day and noting that the text is all set in Ekman, who was an important part of the Jugendstil movement. This typeface, which we associate with Art Nouveau or Jugendstil, was also used in some of the work from the Secessionists. And it's just interesting to see that text, that this design, which looks very display, looks like a headline typeface, was cut in small sizes and meant for text. It was, they were intending for books to be given an entirely new look, even with the small type. So this whole book, the whole story is set in Ekman, the typeface, and kind of a callback to medieval manuscripts. You see the filling of empty space with some ornamentation, but rather than that kind of flourishing ornamentation you'd see from the medieval period, here it's some nice geometric patterns. Same with the borders that really are also reflected in a lot of the illustration that we saw before. So a little bit about Klinger. If you want to see his work, you've got to go to the show at Poster House. Just looking at some of the samples that they have on their website, I wish I could go and see it in person. So those of you in New York who can should do that. He did not attend the School of Applied Arts, where a lot of these other artists did, but he did. He was trained by Moser. He sought him out individually and got private lessons from him. And the cool thing about Klinger, this is all from just a small portfolio of kind of miniaturized poster reprints, is that he took a lot of these ideas from the Secession, brought them to the commercial world, and infused them with humor. There's so much great humor in his work. 2 advertisements here. Maybe can you tell me, Angelina, what MEM is? I don't remember what the company is.
It's for razor blades.
Yes, thank you.
Chopping that dog. Chop, chop, chop.
So great. Yeah, his illustration style, his use of big fields of color, but also his lettering style. He started to, he uses a few different lettering styles, but this one here with the serifs, that kind of wedge sharped serifs here is something that he brings back and again in his work, including this magnificent poster for a cosmetic company for face powder. I think that's what this is, powder of rice powder.
It is. And if you look really closely, she has a broken nose. It's like really weird.
I love her look. She's just like, yeah, what are you gonna do? And so, yeah, here's the lettering again that we saw in the previous posters, and that was then later developed as a typeface by Schriftguss in Dresden. And it's one of a few different typefaces. I wish I had more time to show type specimens. I have more I can show if we have time at the end. I can just toss them in, but a lot of these artists then went on to create typefaces. So Cheshka did, Klinger did. There are people who were inspired by the secession, like Emka, who made many different typefaces. And here's just one example from 1925. And then finally, I just wanted to this kind of out of left field, but I want us all to think about other ideas of what secession means. One of the disappointments of looking at a period like this is how few people of color and how few women are represented. This is a common problem with any any retrospective of a movement that has a name from the Western world, as we have to go back and really dig to uncover the names of uncredited people who were still working at the time. And one example of that, which going across the pond to the US, is Angel Decora, who not part of the Viennese secession, but in my mind was on her own kind of secession. She was doing things with lettering that nobody else was doing at the time. This is same time, 1907, this lettering for the Indians book, other books that she did bindings for or illustrations for, where she's taking inspiration from indigenous art and from nature and bringing it to letter shapes that were completely inventive at the time. So I want us to just think about, we can study those movements that have names, but we also can study those people who are doing things that maybe don't have a name. Maybe they're doing them individually. Maybe they weren't being widely published. And we're so fortunate to have a great article about Angel Decora on our blog by Neben Southall, who is an expert in her work. I really recommend you checking it out. You can see it on, hopefully somebody will put that in the chat. But I also want to just have us all think about what is today's secession? What is our rejection of current conventions in art and design? And I'm seeing a lot of that right now, whether it's in terms of just how we look at design history and are decolonializing that history, or just in terms of letterform design. There's so much interesting type design that's going on right now, and lettering. And rather than just drawing from a specific past, they're rethinking it. And I think it's a pretty exciting time to be following typography and lettering right now. I have more to show, or we can answer questions, but I wanted to make sure I got it in under an hour. Thanks so much to Chris and Lara, who helped a lot with the research on this, and to April and Elise, who provided images, and then to Kate and Rob for just making this collection available. I can't wait till we can see people in person and show some of these things in person, but you can continue to see them virtually. We're going to start a virtual visits program soon, and so you'll be able to see more. But yeah, I have like kind of B-side images if we want to look at them, or we can just chat.
Well, I think while people are queuing up questions, you can flip through some extra awesomeness. Cool. There was one question I missed earlier where Allison was asking, the fancy fringy border on the calendar, is that metal type or ornaments? It was way back.
It's probably was I thought that they may be cut as single blocks, but it could be also that they're modular ornaments. Maybe Rob, who's here, might know the answer to that. I'll just pull it up really quick. Yeah, I don't think that there is repetition there. I think that this is all done individually, whereas most of the kind of stuff you would see in printing at the time, you would use border elements because that would be quicker to set on metal press. But this is, I believe, entirely a woodblock book. So yeah, I don't think there's any metal ornaments being used there. These are all woodcuts. The other thing I just didn't put in that I can show you is kind of the influence that this that the secessionists had on design at the time, just in terms of commercial design. I don't know if you can see this. You seen the video? You see it? Can't tell if it's being.
It's going, Steve.
Oh, okay, good. I didn't hear anybody, so I didn't know. So yeah, this is a portfolio of lithographers, printers, and it's from about the same time period, not necessarily members of the secession, but clearly influenced by what was going on. And it's pretty fun because these are not actual ads. They're kind of demonstrations of what they can do with lettering and ornamentation. And so a lot of these are kind of made up, where you see an alphabet there on the top left, for example, or invented words, just as kind of what you would see in a type specimen of demonstrations of what they can do rather than actual real world advertising. But really beautiful work, and something you would take as a portfolio to a company and say, this is what we could do. This is a compilation from different printers, but it's the kind of thing that they might use as a portfolio. See that funky secessionist R again. They're in, pardon the focus, up on the top right, you can see a little bit of it. Yeah, Nursois. And I also should add that Paula, our collections associate who helps care for a lot of the collection, was just messaging me right before the talk saying, oh, I found another portfolio. So there's more and more in the archive we're always uncovering that we can't wait to share with you. A lot of this hopefully will go up in the online archive and you can see it there, or come visit us when we reopen.
We do have a few questions now in the chat. One, besides Japanese woodblock prints, were there other art forms or lettering traditions that the secessionists were influenced by or responding to?
Good question. I mean, you might have a better answer than me, Angelina. I mean, I feel like there was just so much going on with Art Nouveau and Jugendstil at the time that they were inspired by.
Yeah, I think that everyone usually cites Japanese woodblock prints for like every like Toulouse-Lautrec, Mucha, everybody. But I mean, if you look at some of Klinger's pieces in our show, we have things where he's clearly influenced by stuff that was coming out of Africa and being introduced to Europe at that time, be that masks, statuary, that there are, I'm not sure about, somebody asked if it was Latin American or Middle Eastern. There is some evidence of Middle Eastern, like decorative ornament that is being referenced, or miniature painting. So there is a little bit more than just Japanese influence on these pieces. Yeah, somebody else asked, might you be able to discuss some of the rejection or rethinking of conventional forms and designs that you're seeing in the design and outside the design world? They're thinking in particular of any pushback against aesthetics practices that have become more mainstream with the use of Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen it in the educational community. I've seen so many people who are teaching the history of graphic design, looking beyond the traditional linear approach of this happened and this happened, and these are the movements in order, and thinking about areas of inspiration like you were just mentioning that may not have been part of commercial design, but were part of other visual arts, and making them part of the conversation. Protest art is, I think, getting more of its due place in the conversation. We're excited to be doing an exhibition in a few months about that. Silas Monroe is curating a show for us, pulling from our collection of typographic responses to all sorts of issues over the last 100 years. So those are things I'm seeing a lot more in what's being taught, rather than the traditional textbook approach.
So does anyone have any more questions before we go?
I had one more link to drop here, which I didn't get to get into the presentation, but a lot of what you looked at today is, unless somebody already put it in there, is on a table in our online archive. I put it there. So one of the things that we're doing with the online archive is allowing people to create their own sets of imagery to tell their own story or to use as inspiration, whatever. And this is part of a set of tables we made for a MFA class at the California College of Arts that we teach. We teach like a history of type using the collection, and so this is the section of that class on a table.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. I love the setup of your website. How you can do that. It's just really innovative and lovely. And then somebody asked that will we inform people who attended this talk when we actually post it online? I think that we will probably do that in the follow-up email. So stay tuned.
One other link, I didn't get to put his type designs in the talk, but Cheshka's two of his typefaces, Olympia and Cheshka Antiqua, are in the online archive, so you can see those in that link. Beautiful specimens too.
Oh, nice. And Kevin just asked, is it safe to say that the graphic design that came from the secession became more popular and more well-known than the actual fine art they were exhibiting? I think shots have been fired. I mean, obviously I'm in the graphic design world, so I'll say yes. But then again, if you look at like Gustav Klimt's The Kiss is way more like famous than anything that I handle. So I don't know.
It's funny because from my perspective, as even more entrenched in the type world, I know all these type things, but it's clear that the general public is much more aware of architects and artists. And you go to a Wikipedia page for most of these members of the secession, and if they were an architect, that's what that's what it says on their Wikipedia page, architect. But a lot of what people actually see is either their graphic work or work that's influenced by the graphic work. So even though they're most famous maybe for paintings or architecture, there's an influence into the general culture that's probably just as strong as the design.
All right, I think that covers all the questions. So thank you, and thank Letterform Archive for doing this with us. It's always wonderful to work with you guys. And whoever is based on whatever coast you are, come either see us or come see them.
Absolutely. We would love to look at and show more of this stuff. Thank you.